Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the Scholars Hub. I'm Allison Gampel, Associate Director of Alumni Programs. Thank you so much for joining us for today's lecture called Why Weight Loss is Hard, Separating Fact from Fiction with Professor Jennifer Cook, who's an Associate Professor in the Faculty of Health. I don't know about you, but I am certainly excited to be here today and hoping to learn a few things. In fact, this was one of our most popular sessions to date. So before we begin, I want to accept the responsibility to acknowledge the land that I'm on. And because we're not all gathered in the same place, the land I'm about to acknowledge might not be for the territory that you're on. So please take responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory that you're on. The website nativeland.ca is a good resource for it. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tkaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. We like to conduct a quick poll before each session begins. So the question is, how would you rate your knowledge regarding today's topic, regarding the topic of today's presentation? It's popped up on your screen, so take a moment to answer. Wonderful. It's very helpful for our speakers to know more about who's in our audience and how much they know. From a technical perspective, if you need help with the Zoom webinar, please feel free anytime to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type in your question. We've got a team that's ready to help you. That same button can be used to submit questions for our speaker to answer during the Q&A period that will follow the presentation. I do want you to note that all of your questions and comments are visible to our panelists and staff who are working behind the scenes, so please keep your comments relevant and respectful. All right, the moment we've been waiting for, I'm about to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Jennifer Cook. Dr. Jennifer Cook is currently an associate professor in the School of Kinesiology and Health Science at York University. She has published over 100 scientific papers, reports, and chapters related to obesity, health, and lifestyle behaviors, and is an author of the Canadian Adult Obesity Clinical Practice Guidelines. Currently, her lab is investigating the relationship between obesity and health through clinical human studies and epidemiological approaches. Jennifer, we're so pleased that you can make time to join us today, and I'll allow you to share your screen, and I'll be back after your presentation for the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Okay, here's my screen. Okay. Sorry, there are so many versions of my screen open that I'm not sure which one I need to actually click to make the slides advance. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the first question that I want everyone to think about is whether or not you think that obesity is a matter of personal choice. And what might you think are some of the causes that are driving the rise in obesity? And I think that, if we were in person, many of you might be saying things like physical inactivity or diet, fast food. McDonald's is often to blame for the rise in obesity. And I would say that, yeah, certainly there's evidence to suggest that your lifestyle choices in terms of how many calories you consume and the type of calories that you consume and the amount of physical activity you have are related to your risk of obesity. But is it really that simple? Because when we take a look at population evidence, what we see is that in average, people are reporting that they are engaging in more physical activity now than they were prior to the obesity pandemic. And this is not true just for Canada. As you can see here, this is the amount of physical activity we're reporting over time. We see similar trends in many other countries, including the United States, which has had a very dramatic rise in obesity. When we take a look at food intake, we also see a very different picture than what you might expect. In general, Canadians are reporting that they're consuming less over time. So as the BMI has increased, or the body mass index over the population has increased, people are reporting that they're consuming less. And this is true for men, for women, young and old. And what this means is that people weigh more for a given amount of caloric consumption and physical activity. And in fact, if you consume the same number of calories today and engaged in the same amount of leisure time physical activity today as you did in the 70s, you are probably going to be about 20 pounds heavier. 20 pounds heavier. And so when you think about obesity and its increase over time, it might actually be more difficult to prevent if these trends are true. And what we see is that even in, and this might be surprising, but even in mice, where we control their physical activity and control their dietary intake, there's been a study that shows that mice can gain more weight when you calorically restrict them, as opposed to mice that can eat what they want in the proper amount for them. And so this just speaks to the complexity of obesity and the evidence that suggests that maybe it's a little bit more complicated than what typically people think about. And so when we think about, well, what is causing these differences? And often genes are one of the things that have come up as a potential factor that is related to the rise in body weight that we see. And what we typically say is that the environment is like the gun, whereas you need the genes in order for the environment to cause obesity. And so here are, and so the genes would be the bullet, where the environment is the gun. And so here's some pictures of some monozygotic twins. So these are identical twins that were raised separately, living in very different environments. And you can see that even though they live in very different environments and engage in very different lifestyle, they are very similar in terms of their body expression. Whereas those who are fraternal twins, that means they have differences in their genes, can express much more variability in terms of their body shape. Again, speaking to that large contribution of your genes in allowing you to potentially gain weight. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence that's arising that shows that beyond diet and exercise, there's many other things that influence how we intake calories, so our appetite, and also how we store calories, and so our metabolism and just our energy efficiency. So things like stress, we all know, can drive us to eat more, but it also helps us to conserve energy just in case our body is facing through a situation where food becomes scarce. And so all of these things are physiologically built into our systems to help promote weight stability, preventing weight loss. And this is good from a survival situation, but not good from an obesity situation if you're trying to lose weight. Things like light exposure have been shown to potentially increase your stress because of your lack of sleep. Or impaired quality of sleep. Environmental pollutants have been shown to change the way that we metabolize calories and potentially our appetite. And so many of these things in this list might sound like science fiction, but there is physiological evidence to suggest that all of these things can change the way that we manage and store these calories, and promoting a higher weight gain or obesity. And again, your sensitivity between people will vary. And so it's not that that everyone will develop obesity when exposed to these factors, but only some people. And so again, it depends on your genetic susceptibility to obesity, and that will vary between people very significantly. And so when you think about whether or not obesity is a matter of choice, I think you recognize that many of those things in the list you can't control. You can't control the air that you breathe. You can't control the contaminants within your environment or your food products to a large degree. And you can't control your genes. And so there's many factors. The bulk of the factors, I would suggest, are things that are potentially out of your control. Okay. So what if you do have obesity? What are the choices that you have available to you? And so this is the traditional obesity treatment pyramid that we have lifestyle factors here at the bottom. So your diet and physical activity, followed by pharmacotherapy when your lifestyle modification fails. And if you tried the pharmacotherapy or your medications and that doesn't work, then generally it's thought that you should promote surgery for that patient. Okay, let's take a look at the efficacy, or how well these lifestyle behaviors actually work. And so when you take a look at the literature, looking at physical activity and weight loss, what you see is that the more physical activity you prescribe, the more that they do, the more weight individuals lose. And so there's a lot of scatter between this, but you can generally see that the more you do, the more you lose. And that's kind of exactly what you'd expect. However, when you take a look at the physical activity interventions that follow the physical activity guidelines, you can see that they all cluster down here, which translates to about 1 pound or 2 per month of weight loss, which I think that most of us are probably surprised when we say this. So engaging in 150 minutes per week, so 2.5 hours of physical activity extra per week, will only translate to 1 to 2 pounds of weight loss per month. Okay, and so I think that this is far less than what people expect. And when you compare with dietary interventions, they're more on this end of the spectrum, that 500 caloric calorie deficit per week, and so far more than what you get with physical activity if you just follow the guidelines. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be physically active, because following those guidelines of 150 minutes per week will result in significant health benefits, include managing your glucose, managing your blood pressure, your mental health, great things. But in terms of helping you decrease your weight on the scale, the physical activity interventions are not going to be great. And in fact, the bad news is the more that you do, so if you go beyond these physical activity interventions of 150 minutes per week, or the guidelines, and do even more, you're even more likely to lose less than you expect. And so again, our body is a very wonderful machine that is very efficient in burning calories, which is great in a starvation situation, but again, not great if you're trying to burn those calories and induce weight loss. And part of the reason why almost 3/4 of individuals will lose less than expected weight is that your body perceives weight loss as a negative thing. It's a bad thing. Starvation and weight loss are hand in hand and are perceived as negative factors that the body needs to combat against. And so this is the graph just showing you how many calories you burn before and after overfeeding and underfeeding. So in the yellow line is before the overfeeding. And if you consume more, in general, people will burn more calories. So again, trying to maintain that homeostasis, maintaining that body weight at a stable rate. There is variation in terms of how much they will increase their resting metabolic rate. So some people don't increase it at all. And these are the people that are likely going to be putting on the pounds when overeating, whereas others will increase their energy expenditure. They burn more calories when they overeat, and so they will be less likely to gain the weight. The exact opposite happens with underfeeding. So here again, before the underfeeding is in the yellow, and then after underfeeding, so this would be your dieting situation, you can see that the amount of calories you burn at rest goes down. It's like turning down the thermostat for your body. They're burning less calories, trying to be more efficient to prevent weight loss. Because again, negative calories is bad, perceived to be bad as for the body. They don't want you to starve to death, and it doesn't want you to lose weight. And so that again, it's going to combat against your dieting and eating less. Again, you can see that the spread between the dots is very variable, which means that there are differences in terms of how much people will change their energy expenditure in result to the underfeeding. All of that means, though, that it's going to be harder for you to lose weight. And the reason why your body wants to maintain your body weight is because of a process that happens in your hypothalamus, so the caveman part of your brain. And this is a one-way setting of what your body weight should be. And so when we gain weight, your body resets that body weight set point at a higher and higher body weight. So this is a one-way process that goes higher and higher. And it makes sense if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint. We're born as a baby, probably somewhere in the range of 7 to 8 pounds for most of us. And as we age, we're getting heavier and heavier, and your body is going to reset what that body weight set point is for you to make sure that you don't go down back to the body weight that you were when you were a child, because then you're starving to death. And so your body is going to strongly protect whatever that set point is, regardless of how heavy you are. So even if you're 300 pounds or 100 pounds, the response to caloric deficiency will be the same. Your body is going to perceive it as a negative stress and try and prevent that. Okay? And so unlike physics, you have to remember that physiology is variable. So some of us are like monster trucks. We can take lots of gas and lots of food intake and we burn it all off, and so we're fine. Whereas other of us are more like a Prius. So we're very inefficient. We don't need a lot of energy intake, and we can manage fine like that. And so for these individuals who are going to turn down their energy expenditure are more likely to put on weight. And remember that over time that it can change, and we can be a combination of these things that vary depending on the environment, our stresses, and so again, when we diet or we engage in physical activity, we may not get the type or the magnitude of weight loss that you might expect because of all these changes in the way that our body will metabolize calories and try and become more efficient when when we don't have enough calories. The other question that I often get is, what diet is the best? And the answer is, it doesn't really matter which diet you go on. They're pretty much all the same. So here's an example of a very low calorie diet. And so this is 420 calories per day. So this is low enough that you should only engage in this with medical supervision, and a low calorie diet of 1200 calories. And you can see that although the magnitude of the weight loss that they achieve is different, in the end, you kind of see this Nike swoosh and the rebounding effect of the weight over time. And in general, we suggest that diet and exercise leads to maybe about a 3% weight loss overall long term, which is again great for health benefits, but might not be the magnitude of weight loss that you might be seeking, particularly if you have obesity. Now, the reason why these diets don't work long term, again, is partly due to the changes in the way that we metabolize calories when we're in negative energy balance and losing weight. Again, your body's trying to bring it up. Another way that your brain is trying to bring you back up is your sensitivity to the food environment. And so people who struggle with obesity or people who are engaging in diet weight loss will be more sensitive to pictures like this. And it'll trigger more of your reward pathways, the part of your brain that makes you feel good and say, this is what I want. And so food cravings is another way that your body will promote increased food intake, and particularly the high fat, high sugar foods that are not great for weight management. Conversely, if we looked at pictures like this, I think that this is not what triggers our reward pathway. Probably you're not salivating anymore. And again, this is why it's difficult to maintain these hypocaloric diets, because one, that's not what our brain is telling us we need. And then number two, our brain is perceiving this decreased weight status as something that is bad. Okay, and so this is why 95% of people will not maintain this reduced weight. Okay? Again, lifestyle, you might get 3%, so it's already less than what you might expect, but most of these individuals will regain the weight when you follow them up long term. And again, you might say this is a willpower issue. If they just tried harder or perhaps found the magical diet that worked for them, maybe that would be the right solution. But if I change the topic just slightly, and I told you that 95% of my students fail my class every year, how many of you would think that it is the fault of the student, that they were not driven enough, they weren't disciplined enough, they didn't have enough willpower to do what they needed to do to pass? Or would you put the blame on me, saying that I made it too hard? And I think that most, or at least my students, tell me that this would be my fault. You made it too hard, which is why 95% of the people fail. But for weight loss and weight management, when 95% of the patients regain their body weight, we tell them it's your fault. You should have better willpower. You need to have discipline. You need to think about strategies to help you to manage your weight better. So why is that? And again, I would suggest that this is a stigma and bias, this prejudice that we have as a society that's telling us that obesity is a personal choice. It's a fault of the individual that they need to fix, and it isn't a physiological issue. Okay, what about the 5%? And so this is the question that I always get. Who are these people who are successful? So obviously there's something different physiologically about them that allows them to maintain this lower body weight without their body perceiving it as a negative situation where they need to conserve calories and bring them back up. This is a group that is called from the National Weight Registry, who have been able to lose 30 pounds and keep it off for more than a year. So they're already an outlier in terms of their success for weight management. When you take a look at what they're doing, they're consuming about 1,400 calories per day, which is about 2/3 of a normal calorie consumption. And when you take a look at how much they exercise, it's about 30 to 60 minutes of walking most days of the week. So they eat far less than the average person, and they exercise far more than the average person. And if you saw them walking down the street, they would have a BMI that would be on the high end of overweight, if not class 1 obesity. So you would say, if you ate less and moved more, you might lose some weight and get healthier. But realistically, how much less can someone actually consume? And how much more is it realistic to expect someone to exercise? So again, showing the difficulty of trying to lose weight and maintain that weight loss long term. And again, this is for the rest of your life. Because it is now acknowledged that lifestyle management on its own is not going to give you the magnitude of weight loss that you would want, or patients want, and the longevity of the weight loss is very problematic. We've changed the way that we think about obesity management. And so every patient should have medical nutrition therapy, or what we typically call dieting. And they all should be recommended to engage in physical activity. And I think this is true for all of us, regardless of your weight status. We can all probably eat better, and we can probably engage in a little bit more physical activity. But there's no longer this concept that you need to fail at dieting before your recommended medications or bariatric surgery. And in fact, the thought is that you should give all of these options to patients, and then provide the ones that suit the patients most appropriately. So in terms of medications, how many medications do you think are approved in Canada? And I think you might be surprised to know that there's only 4. We actually have more classes of diabetes medications than we do diabetes medications than we do obesity medications overall. And how much weight do you think people lose with these medications? And I think that you might be surprised to know that in general, it's about 5% or less. And so this is the weight loss that you might expect with diet and exercise and the medications together. You might get to this 8%, but the medication alone for these two are probably about that 5%. These two medications, your Saxenda and Wegovy, are injectable medications. Your Wegovy or your semaglutide medication has only been approved at the end of 2021. And even though it's 3 times better than the other medications that were on the market, very few people spoke about it unless you're an obesity doc. It was shocking. And again, why is it that people are not taking medications or not using medications the way that they do? Well, there's a lot of barriers. One, they cost a lot. They're not covered by OHIP, and they're often not covered by private health insurance plans. And so this is out of pocket. And so if you think about $200 to $1,500 per month towards your obesity medications, you can see that that's problematic, particularly when you consider that most people in weight management, they want to lose more than 25% of your body weight. The medications that we have don't get you there, even with lifestyle and medication combined. And because of the long-term cost and the fact that most of them, up until Wegovy, hasn't really given you a really large weight loss, the long-term adherence that we see for obesity medications are very, very low. And again, these medications only work as long as you take them. So if you get that 5% weight loss, you get improvements in your blood pressure, your joints are often feeling better, your glucose control, many different types of health benefits along with the weight loss, but it's certainly not getting you down to a normal body weight. The only intervention that we have that has been able to give you a sustained weight loss over the long term are surgical interventions. And so unlike the Nike swoosh that you see with lifestyle, diet, exercise, cognitive behavioral therapy, or medications, surgery, you can see a larger weight loss that is sustained for many years. Bariatric surgery is also an effective treatment for hypertension, dyslipidemia, diabetes, sleep apnea. And in fact, this can cause remission of things that are thought to have no cure, such as diabetes. Out of all the weight loss interventions, surgery is the only one that has been shown to actually improve your risk of dying. Over 90% reduction, which is an absolutely enormous number when you're talking about chronic conditions. I don't know of any other intervention that has an improvement in mortality risk as much as this. When you look at who has gotten bariatric surgery over time, there have been more candidates that have been able to receive bariatric surgery. The current numbers are about 8,000 per year. So a lot more bariatric surgeries are being done, but this is still only a very small proportion of the people who are eligible, and the people who are getting it are generally younger and healthier. But if you do the quick math, it would only take about 200 years at the current pace to get everyone who is qualified today to get bariatric surgery. And the reality is that most people are not interested in bariatric surgery. Only about 77% of the weight management clinic patients that I work with are even interested in speaking about it at the first visit. Most of them are saying, no, this is not something I want to think about at all. And why is that? Well, it's because, again, of the stigma and bias, the perception that really this is a willpower issue. And the reality is that it doesn't matter what your BMI is. We all tend to have the same stigma that it's the willpower that is the issue with weight loss. You don't need surgery. You just need to have more willpower. And so the fact that the stigma is carried by those who have obesity and those who don't have obesity similarly just shows how ingrained we are in our beliefs that lifestyle is really the cure to obesity when all the science is pointing contrary. Despite the fact that very few patients want bariatric surgery, the wait time varies across the country, but it is years, the longest of any surgically treated condition. And again, it's an issue of the stigma and bias that there is no need to increase capacity because this is an issue that the individual should solve on their own, which is problematic because we're not letting people or suggesting, or people are not choosing the treatment that would be best for them. And I think that if I had said that someone was waiting 2 to 3 years or 7 years for a cancer-saving treatment, I think the Canadians would be in outrage. But for obesity treatment, it's seemed to be okay. The reason why bariatric surgery works and works long-term, whereas lifestyle and medications don't, is because of, in part, due to the normalization of the appetite hormones. And so we know that the intestines are secreting many things that go and speak to the brain and change behaviors. And in fact, it's very complicated in this relationship. We see that bariatric surgery changes the signaling from your gut to the brain. And so patients with bariatric surgery for the first time can manage their appetite. They aren't driven to eat. And that normalization of the appetite is what allows them to be able to manage their low calorie intake over time. Despite the fact that bariatric surgery is so effective, it still doesn't get most people to a BMI less than 30. So it doesn't cure them of their obesity. Only about 15% of patients who get bariatric surgery might be able to get that BMI under 30. So even the best treatment that we have doesn't actually cure obesity. And so again, you might see someone who is gotten bariatric surgery and still think, hey, that they need to eat less, move more, and maybe take some medications, get surgery to manage their body weight when they've already received the best treatment available. This bias and stigma within healthcare makes it so that patients have worse quality of care and worse health outcomes. One, they don't want to go to their doctor to be told to eat less and move more, to be judged. This results in patients being diagnosed with treatments or their conditions at later stages, meaning that their health outcomes are worse. And it is in general, stigma and bias is not allowed in our society, but for obesity, it still is. And this is impairing their health. And so when you think about the negative health outcomes of obesity, how much is it due to the actual physiological effects of their high body weight versus the lack of care that is given by our healthcare system and society as a whole? In general, I'd ask us to think about, what do we think when we see someone with obesity? Do we judge them automatically based on their body size as someone who is lazy? Or do we see them as potentially hardworking as well? Do we judge them based on their intelligence or their willpower? Do we think about them having a poor lifestyle or thinking perhaps they have a genetic disposition? What are our biases that we have automatically when we see people and judging them in terms of what they do simply based on their body size? Because in reality, obesity is caused by many factors, many of which may not be within your control. Contrary to what your health magazines might be saying, that we don't actually have treatments that are affecting and curing obesity. Yes, there is that minority, but that minority should not be what we base our scientific facts on and our beliefs. Surgery is the most effective treatment, but there are long times, and because of stigma and bias in our society, most are not interested in this treatment that could help improve the quality of their life and their longevity. And again, this stigma is a barrier to care, but it's a barrier to their everyday quality of life. And again, when we think about what people are doing, oftentimes people engage in non-healthy behaviors to try and lose weight. And I would challenge you on whether or not sometimes people are making the cure for obesity actually worse than the condition itself. Thank you for your time, and I can take questions. Okay.
Thank you very, very much. Wow, that was so informative, and questions are coming in. I want to actually read one of the notes that came in through our Q&A from one of our guests who said, wow, this is incredible regarding the myths out there. I hope our media relations team at York can help get this info out to the public. Given the power of this research, congrats and best wishes in sharing and working to change perceptions. I think that really echoes what we're all feeling, and there are over 100 of us here listening to this presentation. So thank you for sharing. At this point, for our audience, if you have questions that you'd like to have asked on your behalf, please type them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I'll ask Dr. Cook on your behalf. If any of you are watching live on Facebook, please submit any questions through the comment section for the video on Facebook.
Okay, on slide 22, I mentioned non-exercise activity. That is essentially all the activities that you do that's not exercise. So walking to go get my coffee, walking to class, folding my laundry, all of those calories that you burn are non-exercise activities. And in general, they account for more of your energy expenditure than your exercise for most individuals. In terms of fatalities during surgery, the bariatric surgery has gotten a lot safer. It varies between sites in terms of their expertise and then their fatality risk. But in general, it is similar to something like a knee replacement surgery. So I don't think that, most people going in for a knee replacement think, I'm going to die and I don't want to do, I'm going to do lifestyle instead because I fear surgery. And that comes out as one of the top reasons why people are saying that they won't get surgery is because they fear surgeries. But I think if I replaced obesity with cancer, all of a sudden you're not so scared of getting that surgery, you're going to get it. And so again, the stigma and bias of, I can fix obesity with lifestyle, I don't need the surgery is really the limiting factor. And it's not your fear of surgery, because I think we would get it if we thought that that was the right move.
Before you go on to the next question, if you don't mind just stopping your screen share.
Oh, sorry.
You in full, that would be great. And you're making my job easy reading the questions and answering them yourself. Feel free to keep going.
Okay, so in terms of strength training and aerobic weight loss, the research basically tells us it doesn't really matter what exercise you do, you're not going to lose a lot of weight. And the reason is that when you look at the caloric expenditure through exercise, it doesn't matter if you're doing weightlifting or aerobics, you're not going to burn a lot. You burn actually more calories with aerobic exercise than you do with resistance. And then there's always that idea, well, if I build muscle, will I just burn more calories and so it'll actually better long term? The problem is that if you're thinking about how many calories that you burn with an extra kilogram of muscle, you're talking about like 30 calories or something. So it's not even enough for an extra Timbit per day. And a kilogram of muscle gain is actually a lot of effort to require to get that energy or that amount of muscle bulk. So in reality, exercise doesn't really change how many calories you burn, either through the exercise itself or your resting metabolic rate. So unfortunately, and I'm saying this as a person with 3 kin degrees, it's not the solution that people are selling it to be. Okay, what are some of the strategies to prevent weight gain in the first place, given the environmental and genetic contributing factors? And I think that's a great question. In general, I don't know. In terms of, I actually embarrassingly wrote the chapter on obesity prevention, and there's very little research out there because it just takes too long. You need to wait decades for people to develop obesity, and it's not really something that people would want to volunteer for. I want to see if I do this, if I'm going to gain weight more than someone else. And we know that lifestyle interventions, most people will drop out after 6 months, and so it's very challenging. The only long-term weight loss study that we have that's shown that you can make people change their eating behaviors and physical activity patterns is the special period in Cuba, where gas was so expensive, people had to ride bikes and people were starving to death because there's no food. When you translate that to our environment where we have choices and we have freedoms, obesity is the natural consequence of the world that we live in. It's not something abnormal. Weight loss is abnormal. And I think that that's what we need to think about, that some of us are going to have to struggle with obesity and weight gain because that's what we're programmed to do in the environment that we live in. And so if you take away obesity equals bad, then it's not actually a problem, right? You can just try and be as healthy as you can within the environment, regardless of what your weight is. And I think that's true for anyone, regardless of your body weight. Okay. So it's kind of like changing the goals. So the power of industry or a battle due to consumer packaged goods industry, et cetera. And yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. So when you think about, even I read a study looking at contaminants in pizza boxes. They're made out of cardboard, and a lot of companies will say, hey, look, we're using recycled products, which is great for the environment, but that also means that they could potentially be contaminated with a lot of substances, and some of which have been shown to promote obesity because they disrupt your endocrine system, the way that you manage your calories. So again, I think that with everything, there's good and bad with it, just recognizing that our environment as a whole is increasing our risk for obesity. And we actually see it in zoo animals that are confined to the same cages, eating the same food. We actually also see increased body weights in genetically identical lab mice and lab rats that are living in the same cages as they were 30 years ago, eating the same food. And so there's a lot of things, and as humans, we're not unique to this obesity epidemic. It's actually very, very systemic in mammals. Okay, so what would I recommend to people with overweight or obesity? And what I recommend for everybody is to, stop equating obesity with bad lifestyle and bad health. You can have bad lifestyle choices regardless of your BMI. You can't know just from looking at someone. And so really we need to stop judging and just see people as people. Those who are heavier are genetically prone to that. And I don't think that we should judge them as necessarily being unhealthy or lack of exercise any more than someone who's skinny. And I think that that is a really important thing to do, because I think that a lot of people are hurting themselves and stressing for something that they can't actually change themselves, not without medications or surgery. societal cure for obesity. So my fourth year class is always disappointed after the whole term when they say, what do you mean there's no cure for obesity? That's why I took the course, to know what the cure is. But the reality is our best cure doesn't cure obesity. But that's not what the media tells us, right? They tell us it's that willpower issue, and keep perpetuating this lie is going to be hurtful for everybody. So after bariatric surgery, what's interesting is that there seems to be a resetting of that body weight. So again, I told you bariatric surgery is the only one where you get that maintained lower weight loss. And so it seems to be that your body is reprogrammed to accept that lower body weight for whatever reason. We're still trying to understand why that happens and how that happens. And then hopefully we can replicate it without surgery and maybe a medication. But the issue is, as long as your body perceives you to be starving, it doesn't really matter where you are on that weight spectrum. It's going to see it as a bad thing. And that's why weight loss is hard. Your body sees it as a negative thing that needs to be addressed and combated against. So what happens to women as they enter menopause? How do the hormones interfere with weight loss? So in general, men and women will have a decreased metabolic rate as you age. You lose muscle mass, and then the muscle mass that you have also tends to burn less calories as you age. And so that weight gain, or the redistribution of muscle mass and then more fat mass, is true regardless of you're men and women. And it's actually even true regardless of whether or not you're active. You see this loss of muscle mass and higher body weight over time. Part of the issue is that because your caloric needs decrease, you have to eat less as you get older. And a lot of us are still saying, well, I ate this in my 20s and I eat the same amount now, not realizing that now your caloric needs are a little bit less. And so I think that, part of the problem is, this stagnant thinking about this is what I've always done. But again, that is a natural thing that happens as we age. What's interesting is that the negative consequences of obesity once you get beyond 65 seem to be a little bit less clear. And so what I mean by that is that people who above 65 that have higher body weights in some circumstances will actually have a lower mortality risk than lean people. And so it seems like that your obesity is actually protective, and it's thought that perhaps it's an energy reserve. You have more lean mass. Individuals with obesity will tend to have more muscle mass than thinner people. And so all of these things are good things if you're going through something like cancer, where there's going to be catabolic diseases where you lose weight very, very quickly. Having more of that energy reserve is actually going to be protective. Okay, so are there any best practices for the weight loss in patients that don't have obesity that wouldn't qualify for bariatric surgery? And so the answer is, well, why are you trying to lose weight in the first place? So if you have overweight, are you trying just to get healthier? If you're just trying to get healthier, then I would say eat better. Try to be as physically active as you can within the context of your lifestyle, but don't worry about the scale. Because there's actually the newer data suggests that your lowest mortality risk is within that overweight BMI. So you might be exactly where you're supposed to be and in the best place for health. Really, what's driving most people to try and lose weight and losing more than they should is that stigma and discrimination. Okay, to be part of the 5% who succeed long-term, what are they actually doing? Most of them are doing walking and jogging. Probably an hour per day. And so again, it's far more than what the average Canadian does. And so it has to be very purposeful, planned, and integrated. The sad news is that we also know that genes play a role in whether or not you're physically active. So if we look at your genetic breakdown, we can do a very good job predicting who's going to drop out of the physical activity intervention and who's going to stay in. So if you're the person that struggles with physical activity, you still benefit from the health benefits of physical activity. Is just going to be harder for you. And so you're going to have to develop strategies that help you succeed, because your genes are not going to help you just do it naturally. And that's just a sad fact. It's the same thing as runner's high. I don't have the runner's high. I never will, because I don't have the genes for it. I picked the wrong parents, unfortunately. And so it's just tougher for me. Why is the simple equation of calories in versus calories out not successful for most people? And so the answer is because of your body's ability to to change the efficiency in which you use calories. So the way that I would equate it is if you think about your buying stocks, and if you look at your bank balance, right? If you just looked at how much money you put in and how much money you took out, is that going to tell you how much money you have in your stock portfolio? And the answer is no, right? Because market fluctuations, it can go up and down, and it's not just what goes in and what goes out. It's all those other factors that happen within the stock market. And the same thing is within your physiology. Your body has the ability to burn less calories, to cut down energy expenditures in non-essential areas like reproduction, immune function, how much you maintain, how often you replace your cells. All of these things, there is a window of control with your body that can make you more efficient. So when you eat less calories, your body perceives it as a stress and says, I'm going to be more energy efficient. And then so you don't lose as much weight as you might expect. So is BMI an effective obesity indicator? And so at a population level, if I'm going to measure thousands of people, BMI is going to give me a pretty good indicator of obesity in Canada. I don't think that the rise in BMI that we've seen over time is because more people are bodybuilding. It's probably an obesity issue. Intermittent fasting is as effective as any other diet. So your low carb, your low fat, your chocolate diet, your blood A diet, your cabbage soup diet, all of them are the same because they don't target your changes in terms of your brain's physiology saying this is what you should weigh. You can always do a caloric negative deficit using any diet you want. That has been established using many, many different things. But can you maintain that long term is up to your body and whether or not it perceives that weight loss as a negative thing that they need to fight against to bring you back up, or it's okay. And if it says it's okay, you're within that 5%, you're that lucky duck. But for everybody else, where your body brings you back up, that is just normal physiology at work. And I'll give you another example that I give my first year students. If everyone holds your breath right now, how many of you think that I've solved global warming? Because you're no longer producing CO2, I have fixed global warming, right? But there's physiological effects that say, oh, you can't maintain this, you got to breathe. And so your CO2, you start producing CO2 again, you start breathing again. And it's the same thing when you think about weight management. Yes, you can lose weight, but at what point is your body going to kick in and say, no, start breathing again, start eating again, stop burning so many calories? And that's really the issue, is that your body is perceiving weight loss as something negative, not something good, even though you want it. What is the caloric intake? So there's actually a lot of calculators online. If you want to type in your age, your sex, and your height, and your weight, it'll tell you it'll give you a pretty good idea of how many calories you should consume. The problem is that most of us are really bad at estimating how much we actually eat. So getting a accurate caloric intake is actually very challenging, and you need to weigh your foods, unfortunately. So it's a lot of work, which is why most people don't do that, even when they're trying to manage their body weight. Does eating your meals earlier in the day make a difference in weight loss? And the answer is absolutely yes. You do not want to eat your meals close to bedtime. So in weight management, we say after 8 p.m., don't eat at all. Because what happens is that when you eat closer to bedtime, even if you ate the same number of calories, you're going to store more of it as fat if you eat them late during the day. So if you don't eat breakfast, you don't eat lunch, and you save it all for a late dinner, that's actually the worst possible thing that you can do for weight management. Can I remind when the epidemic began? Well, it depends on when. Really, the 80s is when people started saying, "Hey, there's an issue," but it's. I think that people have been assessed with a lean body weight for a long time. Yeah. Lifestyle changes in 5%. Is that right? Yes. And 5% keep it off after 2 years. Yes, that is the sad reality. So if you're the person that's lost weight and regained the weight and you didn't reach your, 50% weight loss goal, you're normal. That's for good or for bad. Physiology that determines whether or not people will struggle. Okay. So in terms of physical activity, there's been several genes that have been shown to predict whether or not someone will be physically active over their lifespan. And so when you look at even twins that are genetically identical, even though they're reared in very different environments, what's interesting is that they tend to have the same physical activity patterns and they have similar eating habits. And so part of that could be, they're said, well, they eat with the same tongue. So they have the same perception of the food when it comes in. It causes the same pleasure in their brain because their brains are identical. And so therefore your preference for foods also differs. And I think that all of us know, there's some people that, if you see chocolate cake or potato chips, they obsess and they can't not eat it. And they have to eat the whole thing, where there's other people that just say, no, thank you. And they're not bothered by the chocolate cake that's sitting in front of you. And so these are differences in the way that our brains are programmed, in the ways that we see and we get pleasure from food. And there's clear differences even in childhood in terms of the sensitivity to these external stimuli and how much you eat. So if I see an ad, for example, fried chicken or potato chips or something like that, and then I'm presented with food, I am more likely to overeat on high fat, high sugar foods. If I have obesity, I am even more sensitive to it, and the amount that I increase in terms of my consumption is even more. Okay, so again, there's very, very early differences in terms of your sensitivity to these external exposures, and then also the pleasure that you get from these foods. Okay, so part of the reason why I'm able to manage my weight is I don't really like chocolate cake that much. I can take it, I can leave it, I can take one bite and I can stop. Whereas my friend who really struggles with it, she can't stop it when she has to eat the whole thing. And I think we all know people that, have that. And it's not that I have more willpower than her. In fact, I don't need to use any willpower in that aspect of my life, and I can use it towards other things. Whereas she needs to devote her limited resource. Your willpower is a limited resource towards weight management. And that's one of the problems, is that our willpower will never work 24/7, 365 days of the week. You will always lose to the hypothalamus, your caveman brain. Can I recommend a book? I would recommend the obesity guidelines, but I would not say it's a fun read. I tried to make it more entertaining, but I'm sorry, I don't know a great book. Can we determine the level of weight loss in the body when it goes into starvation mode? What's the average? Okay. So starvation is actually a very interesting area of study. It is actually different from weight loss altogether in terms of the psychology and the physiology of it. Most of the research that was done is very old, because starving people is not going to pass ethics anymore. The Minnesota starvation study was a study that was done, I think in the 70s. It is the last World War. And so you had people who didn't want to fight in the war, who would volunteer for research studies, and they were trying to figure out what is the minimal amount of calories that we need to give to the soldiers so that they don't starve to death and can still maintain what they need to do. And so they actually did a whole bunch of studies looking at starvation and how you refeed people to get them back to their original body weights. What you generally see is that if you don't eat at all, it's actually easier than you're dieting, eating less than you want to. And if you think about alcoholics or people who are doing drugs, could you imagine if the recommendation is just try and have a little bit of a drink and then stop every single day? And if you think about dieting, that's essentially what we're telling people. Just have a little bit and then have the willpower to stop every single day, 3 times a day, every single day. Whereas starvation, your body kind of submits into there's no energy to be had. And so it tries to conserve and say, well, this is just what we have to deal with. So there's no point in craving because there's nothing to be done. Once those people start eating after starvation, what they find is they become ravenous and they actually can overshoot what their original body weight is. So again, that trying to protect from the next starvation bout, because we've experienced this, we know that food is not a certainty. We need to protect against the next bout, and they tend to overshoot.
So I have to jump in and sort of be the bad guy here, because we are running out of time, and we've already gone over. So I wanted to see if we can maybe end by combining, two questions that are here, and then we unfortunately will need to wrap up. Some of you are asking if this presentation is recorded. It is recorded, and it will be available on our YouTube channel, and I'll share more information after we conclude. But maybe if you can just comment about, water intake and carbs or lack of carbs having an impact, and then we'll have to close up there, unfortunately.
Okay, so in general, your body is very good at preventing you from losing weight. It doesn't matter what you eat, how much water you drink, the timing of your food, other than don't eat late at night. If you lose weight, your bodies can perceive it as bad, fight against it, and bring you back up. And this is really why lifestyle intervention is associated very minimal of any weight loss long term. And that is unfortunately the sad truth.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I mean, this 100 people are sort of hanging on to every word, and I think you've probably offered a lot of comfort to to people in terms of helping us to think about some of the stigmas. So great job with your research. Please keep up the work. Keep sharing it with us. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks. So you can turn off your video, and I'll just conclude with some closing remarks. Again, for those of you who'd like to share today's session or watch it again, it will be posted on our YouTube page, youtube.com/YorkU alumni. And you can also watch past lectures you may have missed. I'm going to end with one more poll question, which is, how would you rate your knowledge of today's topic following our discussion? It should pop up on your screen. There it is. All right. So our next Scholars Hub at Home session will take place on February 8th, and it's going to be a really interesting one as well. It's aligned with Black History Month and in partnership with the York University Black Alumni Network. You'll hear from Professor Andrea Davis, who's a humanities professor and the academic convener of a 10,000 person conference that York is hosting this spring called Congress, and alumni and friends are invited to participate in that conference. So her talk is called Reckonings and Reimaginings, Thinking with Black Studies in the Humanities. We hope to see you there. You can register and learn more about this and other upcoming sessions at yorku.ca/alumni and friends. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you again to Dr. Cook for your wonderful research and presentation. We really appreciate you. Thank you all, and be well.